I'd like to go ahead and apologize to Jeff Vaught before we start this.
To Jeff? Why Jeff?
Because we don't have a new intro song. Remember I told you the other day he wanted a new intro song?
Yeah, we still don't. Well, I tried. I told you I tried.
Well, we thought you were going to sing
I listened to that
it.
again. I'm thinking, I did not shoot that down, man. It just wasn't a good one.
Cameron and I thought you were going to sing the song you were humming before the podcast started.
Shut-de dough.
Shut-de-dough.
That's a great song. I don't know why I thought about that. Maybe Patty was shutting the door of the studio. That's what it was.
I inspired you.
To keep out the devil.
Yep.
The inspiration.
Shut-de-dough.
Why don't you sing it for us a little bit there, Jeff?
I don't remember it.
Well, welcome back to Lebanon, Jeff.
Yep. It's great
Got
to
back
be here.
from vacation. We missed you last week.
Your call was so timely.
Was it?
Yeah, because we literally had just finished 18. Our car was parked pretty close to 18 Green, kind of the way that course was structured.
Mm-hmm.
So I just took the cart over. I had gotten the clubs off, put them in the car. I had just gotten the car and turned it on and saw that you had called.
Yeah.
Like, hey, what's up?
That's funny.
I never even thought about timing wise that we were in podcast.
Yeah,
so.
normally I try to give you a heads up, but we were sitting here, we started, and I was like, we should call him. I'm going to call him.
Yeah, yeah.
So
When
straightforward.
and I wasn't through the system. I think you were just holding your telephone up.
Yeah,
Is that
normally
right?
you connected to Bluetooth. I don't know. I guess
Yeah.
it got disconnected. I need to connect it back.
Yeah, no, it was cool. So Alec was with me, and he was like, yeah, I think I'll go get a Coke or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's going to be a minute.
Yeah, no doubt.
Nice. You all had a good week?
We had a great week. Yeah, it was a great week. The way it kind of split up, we were actually down there 7, 8, 9 or 10 days.
Okay.
So we caught the tail end of our oldest son's and his family's week, and then we were able. Then our youngest son came in, and so we were able to be with 2 of the 3 kids' families for 2 or 3 days, and then Cole and his family left, and then Alec and his family stayed with us.
Yeah.
For the rest of the week.
Yeah.
And it was good, and it was very easy. That's one thing I said. I was telling somebody today is that, like, when we were down there, like Alec and his clan, they just get up early in the morning and go do what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't like we all had to get up in the morning and say, okay, what are we going to do today?
Yeah.
You know, it was easy, and that's the way we like it.
Oh,
like
yeah.
if you go somewhere with us, everybody's on their own, right?
Yeah.
You know, you just do your deal. Like the one thing. When the kids were little and we would all go on vacation, I'd have to be the calendar planner, and I would make the agenda for the day. And okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and like, man, that's just not vacation. You know, that's just me working at a nicer place than I normally do.
Different job.
Yeah, that's it. But man, this, you know, now that they're kind of got their own families, it's y'all go do your deal, and if we want it, we'll pop down and see Graham, and then we'll go do what we want to do.
Yeah.
You know, so it was cool. It was great.
Good.
So was that Graham's first trip to the beach?
No, he actually went last year.
Okay.
Yeah, so he went as a little bitty.
So he actually got into it this year.
Oh, listen, yeah, he no fear whatsoever. I'm gonna tell you something that I loved about having him there, getting to see him consistent mornings. Alec would wake up with Graham, bring him into us, and you know, just let him play in the bed with us. Well, one of the first mornings, it was, I don't know, 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. Now, when Julie and I are at the beach, like we sleep until like 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy. Now it's Eastern time, so it's different time zone, but you know, it's kind of dark and you got a fan going, and it's just like, I don't know what it is. It's just, I don't have to get up, you know, and I cannot sleep that late here in town.
Yeah.
Like I just can't do it. But there, dude, I have to make myself get up and get out of bed. So anyway, so Graham comes in, and I'm laying there, and I'm kind of half asleep. And next thing I know, I feel something banging me in the side. And I look over, and Graham has his feet against Julie's side, and he's ramming his head into my side. It was awesome. I was like, dude, this is amazing. Like, this kid's headbutting me. And he's lowering that head, and I mean, he's like driving his head into my side.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, you can't teach that, bro.
Yeah.
Like, that's good. I was like, man, that. And then when he saw that, I just kind of laid there like I didn't wake up. So then he stopped, and he started doing his head like this on me, like just banging his
Going
head.
for the side shot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
So will Graham be receiving a singlet for Christmas?
100%.
Yeah, right.
I told Alec, I said, look, I don't know what your plans are, but he's going to wrestle.
Yeah.
I said, man, he's already got it. Like if he will be that aggressive, he's going to wrestle. And I told Alec while we were down there, I said, you know, Graham is going to be like I can see him being 6'3", 6'4", 280 pounds lineman. he's got the way his legs are,
Yeah.
and he's got a head
Mm-hmm.
that looks like a lineman's head. Now, those of you who were linemen, you all understand what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
Like he just got that big block head, man.
Like
Like
noggin.
yes, he does. It's like yeah, and for him to wrestle heavyweight, listen, if you can wrestle heavyweight and have mobility, you're gonna win matches.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's gonna be good, dude.
Well, I just know I'm thankful for Graham because Graham is the first of the Pratt family boy grandchildren.
Yes.
And I've seen the way you've looked at my boys before Graham came along. I'm like, I'm just not in the wrestling world.
Yeah. No.
But now you've got Graham, so I'm safe.
Yeah. No. Your
Hannon
boys.
and Hudson are safe.
No. I don't know about Hudson. Hannon.
He ain't gonna be a wrestler.
He's a feeler though, man. He's
Yeah.
an emotional feeler.
Yeah.
You know, he'd probably be creative. He's probably got all
Yeah.
that.
He don't have an aggressive,
No.
competitive bone in his body.
No, man, no. I just know. I'll never forget. They were over the house one day, and Birdie was smaller, and so was Hannon. And I mean, Birdie would just like just start running, and like Hannon would be standing there, and you see Hannon's face like, and man, he would just like boom hit poor Hannon, and there would go Hannon rolling back.
Yep.
Oh.
I'd be like, man, I would feel so bad. Like, Birdie, get over here. And Birdie get up, look around, do it again.
Now he's got the male version of Birdie as a brother, so it's all
Yeah,
good.
yeah, that's
He's
what I'm
used to it
saying.
now.
Yeah, so now he's got Hudson, man. So, yeah, and Hudson would probably be a little more aggressive, a little more athletic, you know.
Yeah, they're complete opposites.
Yeah. That's
They're
awesome.
entertaining though. We were at a Brent Baker's wedding last night, and watching them tear up that dance floor was
Really?
quite entertaining.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
I didn't know Brent
especially-
got married.
Yeah, Brent and Casey. Yeah, they got married last night.
Awesome, man.
Yeah, so
Very
excited
cool.
for them.
Good for them.
Shout out to Grandma Charlene for
Yeah,
cutting it
Miss
up on the
Charlene
dance
Baker.
floor.
Yeah, she was.
Was
It
she really?
awesome.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I got a video. You should see it. It's pretty awesome.
Listen, Charlene Baker is awesome.
She really is.
Yeah.
Love her.
She is. She's a spunky, older lady. Put it that way.
A seasoned woman.
She sat on the side and watched for a while, and then I don't know if somebody pulled her up there or what. I'm gonna say it was voluntarily, but you'll be proud of this. It was when the Eminem song came on.
No way.
Started playing Eminem,
Wow.
and Charlene got up, and started
There
dancing.
you go, Miss Charlene.
It was awesome though. It was a good wedding. But
Charlene's awesome.
all that to say, glad you're back this
We're
week.
back, man. Back in the
Yep.
saddle. Yeah, I had a great Sunday. It was great to be back, man. It's good to be with our people, and we have such great people, and
Yeah.
so it's good to be back. It was great to.
Yeah. And Darren did a great job
He
with
did.
the message
He
with the
absolutely
podcast
did.
last week in your absence.
Yeah, he worked hard. I mean, we had a lot of pastoral care issues last
Yeah.
week that needed to be addressed, and
Yeah.
he really shines in that area. So he did a really good job last
Yep.
week.
Good stuff. Well, this week we continued in 1 Corinthians.
And our students were at camp last week.
They were, yeah.
Yeah, to say that, I know Will took that, and I met with Will today just to get a recap on camp and how it went. And the whole time we're meeting, I'm staring at his beard because I'm sitting there looking at his beard, thinking, "Your beard's whiter today than it was 2 weeks ago." You know, I'm like, dude, I'm not going to say this to you, but I
Yeah.
think you aged at camp a little
yeah.
bit.
It happened.
But
That was a large group.
it was a large group, and you know, he's not my age, but I was doing that at his age, and I'm telling you, it
Way
works
on
on
you.
you. It's a lot different, you know, when you're in your 40s and 50s taking kids to camp than when you're in your 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's a big deal. But man, he did a great job. He stepped in for us in our gap right now, but we're very close.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're very close. We've got a great young man that we've been talking with, and we're really excited that about what looks like is coming together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good
Yeah,
stuff.
it's gonna
But it
be
seems
awesome.
like, every camp, I feel like you have some issues or some drama or something
sure.
that happens. But it seems like by the end of the week, they had a great week at camp
Yep.
this year. So
Yeah, you don't want to call day 2 of camp and ask how it's going,
yeah.
because I've done it. I can tell you how it's going to go.
Yeah.
It's not good. But you need to call about day 4 is when things start turning back around and the Lord's working, and it's just it's just a great experience for our students.
Yeah. Day 2 is the day you
No.
question all of your decisions.
That's right.
Retreat. Go on.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
It's day 3 of CentriKid.
Is it kind of
Is
the
it?
same way?
When all the kids, all the sugar's worn off.
Oh, that's right. They
and
start
they're
missing their moms.
Super tired and realizing there's still like 1 or 2 more days left.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's It's interesting.
That's. I'm glad you said that because I'm sure kid
Yeah.
camp is a little bit different than students, but the
but
same
the
thing.
leaders I've talked to said this year there really were no meltdowns.
That's awesome.
Good.
So
That's
that's
awesome.
That's really
That's
good.
great.
That's
Yeah.
great.
Good deal. Well, yeah, like I said, we were back in 1 Corinthians. We were in chapter 10 this week, which, it was a great take on this passage. I love the kind of ties that Paul made at the beginning to some of the Old Testament stories and what they went to. And that first point, I think we could probably get into a little bit for where we're at as a church right now. But first point was a fruitful past doesn't guarantee a victorious future.
Yeah.
You know, even for us at Emmanuel or whatever church, whatever, looking towards the future and what that looks like, we can look back on the past and see a lot of great things that have happened, a lot of ministry that's happened, a lot of things that we love, but that doesn't always guarantee a victorious future. And so we have to keep following the Lord's leadership as we press forward.
Yeah, and I think that that general principle has application in anything and everything that we do. Like I think about in athletics, just because you've beat a team one time, Braylon is in her little team is an all-stars, softball all-stars.
Yeah.
They had to play Smith County and beat them 2 out of 3 times to go to state tournament. And so Smith County was a tough, gritty little team, and so they beat them the first time and it was tough. They came back, beat them again, so they beat them. But I kept trying to tell Braylon, hey, listen, don't think because you beat them once, man, you're going to beat them again. I mean, that doesn't guarantee. I used the illustration in one service. For me, I just remember wrestling this guy. Anytime you would wrestle somebody more than once in a regular season, it's like, I've already beat you, so what's the deal? And it's always much more difficult the second and the third time. And it could be a chance that you let your guard down and lose. But there was a guy at UT that wrestled when I wrestled at Carson Newman, and he was tough. They're 167-pounder. I think he was from Tennessee, maybe. But anyway, so I wrestled the guy at Carson Newman, and just obliterated the poor guy. Like I was a believer, I had become a Christian. And so, like, I was literally picking this guy up and throwing him down on his neck, and like they'd stop the match, bring in the person, to look at him. And I'm like, "Hey, dude, I'm sorry, man. Jesus loves you." Then I do it again, like boom, 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 like, cause, it was that Carson Newman, big UT comes in, like, man, I won't,
Yeah.
So then I got to go to UT and wrestle this guy because you do home and home. So then I got to go to his place and wrestling. Well, I've already destroyed him. So like this match, it was like 8-4, 8-3. Well, it wasn't like that guy got any better.
Yeah.
I was like, I wasn't thinking about it as much,
Yeah.
So I think we've got to keep in our mind that past victories don't guarantee future victories.
Yeah.
Right. So, Israel had an unbelievable past. And I think that's what Paul was trying to bring up to the Corinthians was, you can't keep pointing back and going. And I think churches have a tendency to do that because we always want to talk about the good old days.
Right.
Right. And like around here in Emmanuel, we always talk about Brother Owens and that was the good old days, that we talk about. And I talk about that with a ton of respect just because of how long he was here and what he accomplished, man, the cultural things that he worked through as a pastor. But we can't look back at that. I mentioned in one service where I'd gotten into doing research on the Jesus movement and how it affected this area, and found that revival that happened here back in 72. I think it was 71 or 72 when the revival speaker left. Brother Owens kept it going on, and I think there were over 100 people that made commitments for Christ.
Wow.
And it was in the context of the Jesus movement. So, all of that did affect Lebanon, Tennessee, but again, you can't look back at that. Like, I wonder how many people after that would always look back at that event and go, how come that hadn't happened again? I mean, I remember before Brother Owens passed away, he and I talked about this, and he told me he remembered one Sunday night, because I asked him, I said, Brother Owens, do you remember this? I found this in the records. Oh, yeah, I remember it. One Sunday night, I baptized over 60 people once on a Sunday night.
Wow.
In relation to this particular revival that had happened. And he told me, it was so great to hear him talk about it first person. Well, it would be easy for me as a pastor to go, well, how come that's not happening again? How come that's never happened again? That was just a time when the Holy Spirit just swept through our country and said, hey, this is what's going to happen. And then it did happen all through our country. Israel had an amazing past. I mean, Paul brings up what happened in the desert.
Yeah.
And I think he lifts this up in the context of, here are three of the greatest things that happened in the life of Israel. Number one, they like, think about this. A lot of miracles that happened in the Old Testament. But what miracle was greater than them going through the Red Sea? You know, man, the deliverance out of Egypt, the plagues, like all those things. But to think about, you're standing in front of a sea. And you've got the sea in front of you, and you've got Pharaoh's army coming behind you.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, God's presence drops down in as a cloud and blocks Pharaoh's army. And now you've got a sea in front of you. And all of a sudden, you see Moses stand up and take that big rod, a.k.a. Charlton Heston, in the movie, right? and all of a sudden, you see the waters part. Mm-hmm. And not only that, the Bible says this, and they crossed on dry land.
Yeah.
Man, how'd they get dried? Like, I mean, he just moved the water away.
Yeah.
You know, then he dried it so they could, because it would have been, you can imagine what the bottom would have been like.
Yeah.
And so as they were crossing the Red Sea, water on both sides of them, and God's presence behind them in a cloud.
Mm-hmm.
And then once they got across, God's presence raised up, the waters go back in and drowns Pharaoh's army. Mm. That's like, you would think, like, dude, we're all in.
Yeah.
Like, we're living. And then they get on the other side and they got to eat, and stuff starts popping out of the ground. And they pick that up and start eating it. And then water comes out of a rock. I mean, come on. Like, what more do you need?
Yep.
You know? But he intersperses in that all of their sin and rebellion that happened in the context of that same time period.
Yep.
I mean, can you imagine Moses being up there getting the law from God, and them looking around going, yeah, we're tired of waiting. We need a new God.
Yep.
I've always wondered about Aaron. Mm-hmm. You know, because, I mean, Moses and God both defend Aaron, right? So, but Aaron's just down there with the people. Moses is up there getting the law, and they're like, hey, Aaron, you got to get us a new God, because we're tired of waiting on Moses. And he's like, okay, you know, everybody take their jewelry and bring it to me, and we'll make a I mean, like, come on, Aaron. Mm. But that just, Aaron's role was not to be the leader that Moses, Moses was, right?
Yep.
So anyway, they came down. So, you know, you get the story, and then you've got the story of Moab, where the prostitutes pulled them in, and that was the first time. What's interesting, that's the first time that Baal worship is introduced to the Israelites, in that incident that Paul mentions. And Baal worship would continue to be a thorn in their flesh all through the Israelites' history. Mm. And then you've got, of course, the rebellion of Korah, and dealing with that. So you've got this unbelievable picture of God's movement, and you've got the unbelievable picture of the rebellion of God's people. Mm. And you go, man, how do those two things mix together?
Yeah.
You know, and Paul's doing this in the context of warning the Corinthians. You know, we'll actually wrap up this part of the conversation this coming Sunday of, you know, they continued to have these pagan temples in their towns, like in Corinth, they had these pagan temples, and the Corinthians were still kind of going to these pagan temples. And Paul was going to really do a good job of kind of applying this this weekend, but he was kind of telling them, guys, you don't play with sin like that. Mm. You don't put yourself in a position to where that, you're going to be that close to sin, but you think, man, I got this. Mm. I'm good. It's not going to affect me. You know, and he's, again, the application of that's going to come this Sunday, but it's all in the same context of eating meat sacrificed to idols, and our association, our participation, and man, how close should we be getting to those things? Yeah. And here's the thing, and not think it's not going to affect us.
Right.
Well, just look at the Israelites. You know, there were only 2 men from the adult generation that actually made it to the promised land.
That's exactly right.
Out of all of those who experienced the wonders from the Lord, and only 2.
Yeah. And a whole generation had to die off.
Yeah.
So really, not just 2 of the 12 spies he sent in, 2 of that entire generation.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. To your point. I mean, you know, they were the only ones who really saw it and believed. Mm-hmm. And it had to be a whole new generation that didn't experience all of that. So yeah, you're exactly right,
man. Yeah, I think it's a good point for us too, because for whatever reason, we see those past victories and we try to figure out what can we do to recreate that.
That's right.
So we look at the end, we look at the product, and what do we need to do? So to Brother Owen's story that you're talking about with 60 people baptized in one service, like, I mean, that's, if you do a baptism a minute, that's an hour service with nothing but baptism.
Absolutely.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
So, okay, what do we need to do to recreate that?
Right.
What do we need to do to get a whole bunch of people saved so that we can have another service like that?
Yep.
And so we get more focused on the result than we do the one that's doing the work in the first place. And it's so easy for us to do because, man, God was working then. So what do we need to do to make him work now? Or sometimes I think we can get in our flesh, and what do we need to do to make it look like God's working now,
Right.
so that it looks good on the outside when maybe he has nothing to do with it.
Well, and what's
in the midst of that.
interesting about that logic, think about this logic. You didn't really do anything directly to make it happen the first time.
Right.
So now you're going to do something directly to make it happen the second time.
Right.
To me, that doesn't make any sense.
Yep.
You like, Brother Owens didn't go into that meeting thinking or saying, hey, let's do this, this, and this so that we'll have this, this, and this happen.
Yeah.
You know, man, his heart was just his time for revival. That's just what you did back then. And you had these week-long revivals and, you know, stirring and moving the hearts of God's people. And I remember him saying to me that really it wasn't, a lot really hadn't happened during the week, but there was just something he sensed that said it's not over.
Mm.
And so in faith, it wasn't like things were rolling and we got to keep this going. It was like something he was obedient.
Yeah.
You know, and through that obedience, then, you know, you saw that. So, yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. I think we want to recreate when what we don't understand is that's God's movement.
Yeah.
That's his choice. I mean, he chooses to move and he chooses to bless as he chooses and according to his plan.
Yeah.
You know, our call is to be faithful. And then we get to be a part of what God is doing, you know, which is awesome. So, but yeah, there's no guarantee just because you won. And I think we can do that in our Christian life because we had what we would consider to be a victorious day yesterday doesn't guarantee, like that doesn't carry over, you know, to the next day because we could be pulled into something just as easily the next day and not even know it.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that too, like that, it doesn't give us a reason to just stop, like sit back and sit on the couch and eat our Fritos.
Right.
You know, we're not just sitting back like nothing's happening. Like we still do the work, we still get in there.
Yeah.
But as we follow his leadership, we trust him to do the work in the midst of that.
That's right.
That second point, learn from those who have gone before us. I think that's a big one. Why do you think we have a hard time of that sometimes? Maybe it's a personality thing, but you know, you think of just in history class, we learn these things that America's been through, that our leaders have been through, whatever. And I think it's so important. Some people have that history mind that you hear these stories in history and can pull from that and want to learn from it. I know for me and my personality, and this is not a positive thing about my personality, but like you could tell me not to do something, but until I do it and experience it and figure out, oh yeah, that's probably not good for me.
Yeah.
And some people just have that personality. Now I've learned over time to listen to people every now and then. But why do you think it is hard for us sometimes to learn from the past and to listen to past experience and grow from that?
Yeah, I would say I think it's because we think we're different and we think our situations are so different. So, you know, I think it's easy for us to look back and go, well, yeah, but because, you know, I used Winston Churchill's quote, which actually wasn't his quote. He quoted someone else where he said, you know, if those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And I think that's a great, obviously it was a very famous statement that he used. But the reality is that as we look back and we see people who just in the scriptures, you know, I mean, you know, we don't have to look at 10, 20 years ago. We can look at scriptures thousands of years ago and say, okay, man, look at David's example. Look at Solomon's example. Look at Samson's example. I mean, just take the judges, you know, look at all of their examples of how, man, those guys started strong and they just didn't finish strong. You know, I think with the exception maybe of Deborah and another, but anyway, but majority of the judges, I can say that safely, didn't finish well.
Yeah.
You know, and even like David, Solomon, and some others. I mean, Solomon, you take Solomon, the wisest man that's ever lived, at the end of his life, we get this journey that he journaled for us called Ecclesiastes.
Yeah.
You know, where he's doing all of these things, looking for satisfaction outside of God. And so I think we've got plenty in the scriptures for us to go, man, we can learn from these. We can look at these and it's real, like apply, but hey, we're better. We're stronger. You know, we're smarter. I think that's where our flesh jumps in and says, man, you got this. I think that's why Paul says in this passage, you know, when it comes to sin, be careful. You know, I talked about, you know, the first warning was, man, don't be self-confident when it comes to sin. Mm-hmm. You know, we can't be self-confident in ourselves to think we got this and we can stand against sin. So I just think it's our flesh that wants us to look at that and go, well, yeah, but I'm different.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's really easy to do.
Yeah, for sure.
That 5-letter word that creeps in when we are not actively pursuing the Lord. And that would be pride.
Yep, right? Absolutely.
When we're looking inward instead of upward.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
and we don't realize that's a daily deal.
It is.
Like that is not, I mean, pride can sneak in anywhere because like we've said before, pride really is the root of every sin. Think about that. The root of every sin is pride. Because somewhere in all of sin, we have said we know better than God. Mm-hmm. So what's the root of that? Yep. Like any sin you can think of, it always comes down to us saying we know better than God.
Yeah.
And so you're right. That's where, you know, the one thing that Satan can do for us is make us think we're stronger spiritually than we really are.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to hit on, I forgot, I wrote it down at the bottom that someone actually did submit a question this week. At this point, it's a question about the last verse in the chapter. So if you were the one that submitted the question, I will be sure to get that before we get to the end. But to keep kind of going through this, I love the subpoints on this second point too, that a lack of patience will always lead to idolatry. Mm-hmm. And these are pulling from these stories that Paul is using. Yeah. Lack of patience will always lead to idolatry. A lack of discipline will always lead to immorality. And a lack of satisfaction will always lead to complaining. I know you said you wanted to dig into that a little more before we started.
Well, yeah, I think the way that the Holy Spirit was kind of helping me think through this idea of idolatry and immorality and how they really are connected. Because when you look at those three stories, the Holy Spirit just didn't randomly give these three stories to Paul to write in this letter without this purpose. When you look at them, that it always does start with idolatry with us, you know. And so idolatry is not necessarily when we replace God with something else. We have to think about it as we're just putting something up there that in a place that only God belongs.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, so I think we've convinced ourselves, as long as I don't have some carved statue in my house, I'm not an idolater. Mm. But the reality is that it's more about our heart and our affection than it is having a statue in the hallway. It really is what deserves our worship. Mm. And so there's a place above all that God is, and he belongs there. Mm. And so anytime I put anything up there with him, because it goes back to the first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Where literally, this is not just preacher talk. When you look at the Hebrew word, it literally means before me, beside me, or behind me. Mm-hmm. So this concept of there's an isolated place, a high place that only God belongs. So when God's saying that, he's saying nothing is on my level. God's a jealous God. He's the one that only deserves our worship, right? So when I put anything up there with him, I've become an idolater. Okay, so think about that. So let's just say it's I don't know, something silly. Let's just say it's a car. Okay, so now all of a sudden I've began to worship. I say that because I had a 67 Camaro and I found myself giving it a lot of attention at a certain point in my life, right?
One of those hyperfixations we were talking about.
Yeah, yes. Which is easy for me to do. So all of a sudden you realize and you wake up one day and you go, man, I'm sharing a lot of my time with an idol. Mm. I'm not so because again, we got this picture of our mind. Well, what do you do? Going out there and building an altar and bowing down on your knees and worshiping something?
Yeah.
No, that's not it. It's what are we committing our time and our life and our resources to?
Yeah. And what is it replacing?
And what is it replacing? Yeah. And so all of a sudden you realize that not only have I put something there which make me an idolater, now I'm beginning to share affections with this thing that only belongs to God.
Yeah.
Well, when I've done that, what have I done? I've committed immorality against God.
Yeah.
Because the affection that in my heart that only belongs to Him is now going to something else. Now I've basically committed immorality.
Yeah.
Because now I am giving affection to an idol that belongs to God. Because that really is the definition of immorality is not just sexual immorality.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that word sexual defines a type of immorality.
Right. Right.
But immorality is any time that we share affections. You know, somebody can have, and like we talk about people having emotional affairs. Well, those are just as bad as physical affairs, right? When a person begins to share emotional affection with another person other than their spouse, that's immorality. And so when we do that again, and I think we've so drawn the line that again we're willing to say, well, no, it's not, because you've not actually done this. Well, no, it's not about that. Anytime we share affections with something that doesn't have a right to that affection, we've become immoral people. And so we have to be very careful, because that's exactly what the Israelites did.
Yeah.
Right. So they become idolaters, and then, because you just think about what led to the situation in Moab, where all of them got drug into sexual immorality. Well, what were they doing? They got drug into Baal worship.
Yeah.
So what happened? They put another god up there with Yahweh, and as soon as they did that, their affection went to that god instead of Yahweh, which resulted in then how they worshiped, which was through sexual immorality. And so they became immoral people because of their idolatry. So one always leads to the other.
Yeah.
Like if you find yourself in immorality, it's because you've become an idolater and you didn't know it.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's the number one command. Like, you don't put anything on God's level. You
Right.
better have a very high view of Jesus Christ in your life.
Yeah.
Right? And if we don't, we're in danger of putting something else up there.
Yeah.
And that's when we find ourselves in trouble.
Yeah. I think a huge indicator of this too is like when you're talking about the car thing, and I mentioned just what are we replacing it with, or what are we replacing to spend time or money or whatever it is on that. When we think about our time and our resources, are two huge indicators of where what's at the top of our list. In college, I remember I think it was just like one kind of one-off lesson in a course that had nothing to do with time management, but we were talking about time management. It was the first time it really like kind of hit me that everybody has 24 hours in a day. That's pretty obvious. Everybody has the same amount of time in their day. And so you take that 24 hours, and at the end of the day, yes, you have a job, you may have a family, you've got things that are going to take different times. You have to sleep at some point, you have to eat, but you decide what happens in that 24 hours of your day. And so, since then I was like, it's a good point. Everybody has the same amount of time. And so when I hear people say, from that point on, when I'd hear people say, well, I don't have time to do whatever it may be, whether it's study for a test or spend time practicing your instrument or spend time with the Lord. That was one of my excuses is, well, I'm in school. I just ran out of time. I didn't have time to read my Bible today. That's a terrible excuse.
Yeah.
Because I've had time to do all of these other things,
That's right.
which means I have chosen to do them instead of
Yes.
this.
Yes.
And so it's not to say we should just be sitting on our couch all day and reading the Bible and doing nothing else. Like, yeah, that'd be great to some extent, but also we still have lives. We still have families to pour into. We still have friends to hang out with. We still have a job to do at our work, go to work, do our job. And so there's things that has to be done.
Yeah.
But when we are spending time doing, whether it's working on a car, and not that that's a bad thing.
Right.
Like we can do our hobbies
Absolutely.
too. But if we're doing that at the expense of our time that we're spending with the Lord, and that is outweighing, then I think we've got our priorities off there.
But you've got to be careful because you can get pulled into idolatry and you not even know it.
Yep.
You mentioned a phrase. I've never used that phrase to describe myself, but you're exactly right. The phrase of hyperfixation.
Yeah.
So I've just always thought about it as being I'm an obsessive person. So when I get into something, and as I think about my life, like that's been one of my greatest assets, is the fact that God wired me that way. That I get hyperfixated on something.
Yeah.
And so when I do, I'm going to learn everything I can learn about it, and I'm going to be all involved in it. And I think it's helped me. It's helped me throughout my life.
Yeah.
Have success in some areas where maybe quicker than other people, but it has its dark side too, because you get so obsessed with something.
Yep.
It's the only thing that you do. I remember when my dad got involved in old cars. Like my dad desperately, and again, you've heard me talk about my upbringing. We just didn't have anything, but my dad somehow found $500 to go buy a 1938 Chevrolet two-door sedan. Never forget it. Yellow, wooden running boards, had a small block end. I mean, well, I got fixated on old cars. And so I got every Street Rodder magazine I could find, every old car magazine I can find, and I memorized every grill shell of an old car. so that today, anytime I see an old car, I can look at the front end of that car and tell you exactly what it is.
Wow.
But I did this as a 12 or 13-year-old.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to learn everything I could learn about them, because when I would go to these places and my dad would say, "Well, that's a 28 Ford. How do you know that?" Well, you know that by the grill shell. At 28, 29, and 30, that's a 32. How do you know that? Well, that's the only year Ford made that particular grill shell.
Yeah.
So that's a 34 because of the doors. And so anyway, so I just got fixated on that.
Yeah.
So, I just spent all of my time looking and reading and understanding that. Well, what I've figured out is over the years, like I did that with wrestling. Like once I got into wrestling, I got hyper fixated on it. And so it's all out. And so, I think about, the very first year I wrestled, I was horrible at the beginning of the year and ended up being state runner up. Well, how does that happen?
Yeah.
Well, I just got so hyper fixated on that it's all I could think about, all I could do. The dark side of that is it becomes things that if you're not careful. I mean, how did I go from having 3 small pieces of blow mold to, I'm not going to tell you the number, but a lot, right?
Ish.
A lot.
Yeah. The interesting thing happening with all that in my life, but I'll talk about that later. But you look at that and you go, how's that happen?
Yeah.
Right. So you got to know yourself, because even your personality, and you could even not intentionally, like I talked about the old car that my oldest son and I built together when we lived in North Carolina, you become so hyper fixated on something. And then you wake up one day and go, how did I spend all that time and all that money on something like that? And not even think about it.
Yeah.
Well, it can sneak up there on that level. And then it starts consuming your time and your attention and your dollars and even your affection.
Yep.
Right. And then you go, because you could wake up one day and be an idolater, and how did I get there? So that's where we have to be careful. It's not just this obvious, I'm going to make a conscious decision before all of this begins to happen,
right,
to be an idolater about that.
Yep.
It's not how it works.
Yeah. Yep.
Man, you get sucked in and pulled in, and the next thing you know, there you are.
Yeah, absolutely.
That happened with Joey and I when we first got married. I told you guys that he's a pilot, and when we first married, he had an airplane, and I don't know the year or whatever, but it was older, and so it did require quite a bit of maintenance and upkeep, and airplane parts are not cheap.
No, yes.
And airplane mechanics
right.
are not cheap.
Right.
And so, again, we were newly married. Neither one of us brought much to the table money-wise to the marriage anyways, but I remember one week it was like airplane parts or food.
Yeah.
This is where we are. So like the next week he sold his airplane, his baby. So it was kind of a realization of, man, I made a covenant with this woman to take care of her. And that was the first thing I told y'all. He told me was, I can spoil you rotten.
Yeah.
He's like, I can't even put food on your table. Yeah, this is gone.
That's how easy it can happen.
Yeah.
Hey, ask Julie sometime. Ask Julie sometime about her salt and pepper shaker collection.
Oh no.
Yeah, Julie has learned not to say to me, "Hey, I think I'd like to start collecting X." Like she knows better than to say that to me, because that's all I need.
Yeah.
is because her mom has got this really neat old salt and pepper shakers, where they made them out of like characters, just old things.
Yeah.
And she Julie said to me one time, this was years ago. She said, "Man, I think I'd like to start collecting those."
Game on.
Game on, man. Well, dude, in like a month, she already had like 14 or 15 sets,
She's like, I'd like to not start. I'd like to not collect.
That's not how you collect stuff. Like, you collect stuff 1 or 2 a year. And I'm like, why do you want to wait? Like, boom, here's you. Yeah, here's a collection.
We got it.
Yeah. What do we do now? What are we going to collect next? It's just so funny, man. I can think about doing that, man, with a lot of things over my life, pocket knives and just fill in the blank,
Yeah.
So
the internet's made them all so accessible too.
Yeah, and that's the problem.
Yeah. That last one, I think, too, the last sub point of the second point, lack of satisfaction will always lead to complaining. Yep. I think that's a big one for us, because so often it's a lot easier just to sit back and complain about something, just to talk about it with people who are like-minded, than to actually go and deal with it.
Yeah.
And so I think for all of us, and that can go down a dark road that I think Paul is warning about here. But yeah, it's it. And what we don't realize is when we complain, when we get in that world, we really end up doing more harm to the situation or more harm to ourselves at times than doing anything good.
Yeah.
So just sitting back and complaining is so often just destructive in so many ways. And so I think that's just a good reminder for all of us.
And you have to be careful to make sure that you delineate. I mean, because, the Bible does say do everything without complaining or arguing.
Right.
So does that mean that I can't make a suggestion about something to maybe make it better? You know what I mean?
Right.
So you got to delineate between, like, there's a difference between constructive criticism, suggestions,
sure,
and complaining and murmuring. When you dig into those words that Paul uses for complaining, it's really murmuring. It's just this idea of chatter. Really, you're and that says more about the person doing it than it does the issue that they're complaining about. And I think that's what Paul was getting to, is that really complaining is you revealing what's in your heart.
Yeah.
Jesus said, out of the mouth, the contents of the heart, what's in the heart comes out of the mouth. Right. And so someone who's complaining all the time, basically what that's showing is a person who's not satisfied, who doesn't really understand who they are in Christ. Well, when we're not satisfied with anything, because here's the thing, if you're not satisfied in Christ, nothing will satisfy you.
That's right.
Yeah.
Nothing. And so you're trying everything else and it's not working. And at some point that gets very frustrating.
Yeah.
And so what do? You just complain about everything. And so I think that's what, in that situation, that's around the story of Korah's rebellion, when all those people stood against Moses and Aaron, and, they were complaining, and the Israelites did that all through the desert.
Yep.
All through the desert, There was a point where they said, man, we're going to go back to Egypt. Egypt was so much better than this.
Yeah.
Well, they had forgotten that they were enslaved in Egypt.
Yeah.
It wasn't better. But, again, just something for them to complain about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the root of complaining there, when we're talking about complaining, when you're complaining about something, you're not going to someone for a solution.
Absolutely.
You're complaining or talking about something that's happening over here to people who are just going to let you complain about it and may affirm that complaining side, as opposed to actually going and dealing and confronting the issue for the sake of a solution or for moving forward.
Right.
So we have to be mindful of what our response is to a complainer.
For sure.
Because we can shut it down or we can fuel it.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
You're exactly right. And I think when I kind of made a humorous illustration about this, we have a tendency to say about people who complain, that's just the way they are. But Jesus looks at complaining just like he looks at murder or stealing or any other sin. We would never say that about somebody who steals or who murders or who whatever. But a complainer, we will say, well, that's just the way they are. That's just the way they are. Well, why do we put up with that? Like, why do we accept that? Because we think it doesn't do damage? No, it does a tremendous amount of damage.
Yeah.
And not only that, do we not love that person enough to be concerned about their dissatisfaction in their heart. You know?
Yep.
I mean, you knew this about me all the time, and you never approached me. You never confronted me about that.
Right.
You know, I think that's when you talk about that, if you have that person. Now, I do think there are people, and I think this is the dark side of this personality, who tend to be wired more cup half empty, tend to see things a little more from a warrior standpoint, you know, those types of things, right? So people with that personality, their dark side, all of us have a dark side to our personality, right? That's just reality. The dark side of that can be complaining, kind of falling into the trap of complaining and things of that nature. And so we all know that can happen. But somebody who just consistently, that's just who they are, man, that's revealing that there's no satisfaction in their heart.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. All right. So now getting to this last point, I want to go ahead and hit the question that was submitted. So if you are the person, normally we hit them at the beginning. So sorry that we've now waited till close to the end of the podcast to hit this one. But it's a great question nonetheless. So getting into 1 Corinthians 10:13, which was kind of the tail end of the message, said, help me out with this. I'm a little confused. I've always heard people say that this verse means God won't give us more than we can handle. And let me read the verse real quick so we can give context.
I was going to pull it up as well.
So verse 13 says, no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. With the temptation, he will also provide a way of escape that you may be able to endure it. Did you have a different translation?
No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to humanity. God is faithful, and he will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able.
Yeah.
But with the temptation, he will also provide a way of escape so that you are able to bear it.
Yeah. So they asked, I've always heard people say that this verse means God won't give us more than we can handle, like bad health, divorce, financial problems, etc. But after hearing this sermon this morning, I'm not sure if this is what this verse means at all. The context of this verse is sin, not troubles. Am I right?
They're exactly right. Yep. And I love that they saw that, because we misquote this verse all of the time. This verse deals specifically with sin. And this verse deals with God's protection for his people in the area of temptation.
Yep.
And so he promises us, every single one of us that love him and claim him as Savior, he promises us that none of us will ever be tempted beyond what we can handle. Like, we will not be put in a situation that there is no way we could not stand against that. He'll never put us in a position where we are guaranteed to fail. And I love that. That's a great promise, man. So now the other side of that means when I do fail, that's on me.
Yeah.
Like, I can't blame anybody else. I can't Flip Wilson that situation and say the devil made me do it.
Yeah.
I was surprised so many people in the 10 o'clock service knew who Flip Wilson was. But maybe that's just all the older people in the 10 o'clock service.
I can tell you, I did not.
You had no idea.
I didn't either. I've heard of the name, but
really,
I don't know what. The devil made me do it. Was it a TV show?
The Flip Wilson. He was a comedy hour back in the late 60s and early 70s. Okay. Probably more in the 70s.
Okay.
So I didn't expect a lot of our 10 o'clock people to know that. They weren't even born yet.
Yeah.
But so Flip Wilson's one of his characters. His famous line, "The devil made me do it." You know. Yeah. So anyway, so we have nobody to blame but ourselves.
Yeah.
The way we've used that is that we've said God won't put anything on you that you can't handle. So listen, God's not going to put you in a situation where, you know, and you're going to have an illness or something like that you can't handle. So you're going to be okay. It's not what it says at all.
Yeah.
No.
The reality is God always puts us in situations that we can't handle.
Yeah.
So that we will run to him. I mean, the whole purpose of the law was to show us we need him.
Yeah.
So why would God create in us the ability to be self-reliant?
Yeah.
It makes no sense. But we want to say that because we want to feel like we got this.
Yeah. And
we don't need God.
Yeah.
Hey, God's never going to put you in a situation where you need him.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
God's never going to allow us to be tempted beyond what we can handle. That's the promise. So the person who submitted that, man, praise God that they're sitting there listening to the Holy Spirit speak to their heart and go, let me show you what this really means.
Yeah.
You know, this is awesome. But yeah, now to the promise, there's a great promise there that when you read through those verses, it is amazing to me how much God provides for us in the area of temptation. He provides protection. He provides limitation. He provides a way out. And I love where Paul says, God is faithful. God is faithful. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to humanity. God is faithful, and he will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. But with the temptation, he'll always provide a way out.
Yeah.
So here is God creating for us the path of victory in any time we're tempted. Any situation we're tempted, God is providing in the context of that temptation a path to victory. We've got to choose it.
Yep.
Right? We've got to choose it. Now, the reality is that we have to choose even to get into the environment of sin. I'm not saying that we are not tempted throughout our day. Temptation is interesting because we always think it takes Satan or his demons to tempt us. The reality is James teaches us that we are tempted when we are drawn away and enticed by our own evil desires. So our flesh still has its evil desires, its own evil desires. It's like James says, look, you don't need no help. There's enough in you and in me that would draw us away, that would entice us to sin against God. Our flesh, we battle with our flesh every day. It's not our sinful nature. If you still have a sinful nature, then you're in trouble, right? You don't know Jesus because Jesus, the Bible says, when he comes into our life, crucifies our sinful nature, right? Crucifies it. So that means something dies. He replaces it with his nature. We still have a flesh, right? We still have a mind that Satan likes to throw those thoughts into. And then once we get them in our head, then we kind of start thinking about how can I manifest this? How can I make this happen? Okay, how can I process this? So a strong believer that allows themselves to get into an environment where they're going to be pounded with all of these thoughts that would draw them into temptation and sin, you start to see the process happen. So James says, when a thought is conceived, it gives birth to sin. When sin is then developed, grown, matures, it gives birth to death. So you have this very clear process of how sin happens in the life of a believer. Okay? The problem is that we can choose not to put ourselves in that environment. And that's exactly what Paul's going to talk about this Sunday. We're going to finish chapter 10, finish up this conversation, because here's what was happening in Corinth. The believers were still going to the pagan temples because they had remember, they had this knowledge, this super knowledge they thought that they all had that no one else had, that they knew this. Demons are nothing. Idols are nothing. It's just meat. So it really doesn't matter. It doesn't affect me anymore if I go there. Well, they were still going. And they were still finding themselves getting drawn into sexual immorality. And Paul's like, let me help you with that. Now, what's interesting is going to be the correlation between that culture and ours. Because here's a question we have to ask ourselves. What are the environments that we need to avoid when it comes to our life and our connection to sin? Because those can all be different. I remember back when I was in seminary, it was weird, but it became very popular. It became kind of, I don't know if popular is the right word, but it became, I'll just use the word popular for lack of a better word, where guys were going into bars and guys were going into strip joints to witness to people. You kind of had this, back then you had this kind of mentality that was kind of floating around where this idea, this phrase I remember hearing, man, I want to be one of those guys that storms Hell's Gates with a water pistol. Right. So that kind of, okay, where's the worst place we can think about going? Man, let's go to the strip joints. Man, we're going to go to the strip joints. I never did this. Hear me clear. I never did that because I was like, no, dude, I'm not going to get involved in that environment. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Right. But now, man, do people in those places need Jesus? Absolutely. But you got to be smart enough not to put yourself in an environment, right? I'll never forget this. And some of our listeners will get this. You guys won't understand this. But back when I was in college, I'd just gotten saved. This was mid 80s, right? So we still had albums. Now I know albums have come back. They're like retro now. This is like the first generation of having.
When you say albums, you mean it's now called vinyl.
Oh, vinyl.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, vinyl.
Yeah. No, we called them LPs. LPs, long plays.
Long play.
So you had, so I remember, never forget, just gotten saved, and we were in an alumni dorm and going to this one guy's room, and we went to this guy's room, and back then they had this thing called backward masking, where you could run an album backward and it would like, but the messages that they would put on there subliminally and all this kind of stuff. Well, this guy had gotten into studying this, and he was like going to study it, and he was going to do seminars. He really felt like it was, it really was making an impact on teenagers, and he really wanted to do a lot of work on this. Well, that's kind of cool. Met the guy. We go back to his room 3 months later. Everything is pitch dark. Walls are black, windows are blacked out. Like, the guy obviously got sucked into a world that got him more than he benefited. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, literally, like, it was crazy. And I mean, he wouldn't come out of his room, and it became like we all knew, like, this guy got sucked in the hole.
Wow. Like,
what happened to this guy? And he was listening to this music over and over and over and over, and he was into kind of the dark stuff, and back then, like back in the late 70s, early 80s, you had bands that were coming out with just blatant Satan, they're just anyway. He associated himself, participated in things that he felt like he was strong enough to handle, that literally pulled him in. And it was a kind of eye opener for me, is that, hey, look, there are just some environments you just don't go to.
Yep.
You just don't put yourself in, because when you put yourself in those, you think you're strong enough to handle them, right? Yeah. And the problem is that when we do that, we can't see the window, we can't see the door. Mm. The Bible says that when we're tempted, God will always provide a way out. Sometimes it's a door, sometimes it's a window. I think when we get in situations that we put ourselves in, we fail to be able to see the door or the window. Mm. Can't see the way out. And we think the only way out is to be in. And that's when we find ourselves involved in sin.
Yeah, it's huge.
So it's going to be, it's really cool. That's why I love walking through a book of the Bible, because you can see how these conversations kind of pan out, and then how he concludes it. Because 11, he changes, he switches gears. Burp. Yeah. And he starts doing something else in 11 forward. But this Sunday is going to be neat to see how he wraps this up.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's important to remember, too, that those environments are going to be different for every person.
Great point. And that's why I said, for us back in the 80s, like, that wouldn't be the same today.
Yeah.
And I think, and here's what's going to be hard, is that people are going to want me to tell them what those environments are to avoid, right?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I can't give you, now I think Paul's going to have some good principles for us to say, okay, what about this environment?
Yeah.
I mean, I could easily say this, hey, if you're a recovering alcoholic, don't go into a bar to witness to somebody.
Yep.
Like, that's pretty simple.
Yep.
Right? So I think I could say that to somebody and they would get that. They would go, yeah, I can't put myself in that environment.
Right.
That's not a healthy environment for me to be in. And so I think we all have to ask ourselves the questions. And I think there are some, Cameron, to your point, I think there are some general environments that we all need to avoid.
Yeah.
and I think that there are some other environments that may be specific just to my makeup, personality, sure. and yours. All of ours can be different.
Yeah.
And so I think we have to know that about ourselves.
Yep.
And be willing to say, man, I don't need to associate myself with that for this particular reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, that's where I got to be careful, because when I was a young believer, I would say, I don't need to associate myself with that environment, and neither do you. And if you do, you're going to hell,
Yeah.
Like you have to be careful with that. I think in the general environment world, I think it's safe to say that in some things, but I think in those specific environments, right? And I think Paul deals with that in a neat way, concluding chapter 10.
Yeah. And in a lot of ways, that then comes back to a few weeks ago, talking about a stumbling block and stronger, weaker brother and all that conversation.
Yeah.
But yeah, some of those environments can be, some of them are pretty, probably, like you said, general for everybody.
Yeah.
Probably not I'd probably say it's a general area to don't go into a strip club. Like that's not going to be your environment
Right.
to go and share the gospel.
Right.
But for some
like
people
for
it may
you-
be,
For example,
yeah.
you don't need to go to Carter's Vintage Guitar Shop.
Why? I don't have the money to buy any of those guitars, so I can go there and it's fine
that's
for
right.
me.
That's right. That's right. But you know what I'm saying? Like it could be a good thing.
Yeah.
Like I think that's one thing we have to remember is that
Yeah.
these
Well, I'm
environments.
thinking about like just shopping in general. Some people just general shopping. Like the mall may not be the best place for you because you get in a particular environment.
Amazon.
That might be mine.
Amazon.
If we're being honest, that's one of mine.
Listen, I'm just telling you. Hey, there's some people
Yeah.
that need to delete that subscription.
Yeah. So then to that too, not maybe
Because you know what?
maybe the phone as a whole, it may be particular apps because then you get into social media. Like that may be a stumbling block or a spot for people.
I think we have to, when we think about environments,
Yep.
we have to think beyond the obvious negative environments.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because that's what, like, even Satan will go, oh, okay, I'll give you 4 obvious ones because you're not going to think about the 5 that I got you in.
Yep.
Right? Because you don't understand this, but I got you with this one because you're making that an idol in your life and you don't even know it because you think it's good.
Yep.
You know, oh, this benefits me because look at what this did with this. Yeah, but it's become an idol.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
it's going to be good.
I know we're over an hour now, but want to make one quick little kind of caveat comment. And this is, I've been just staggered lately at just the statistics of this, but how many people that maybe in our lives that have been affected by whether it be sexual assault or rape or something in their past, that they may just be in our everyday life that we think nothing of it, but have been affected by it in one way or another. So when you talk about being in a position that you won't be tempted without a way of escape, this is talking about a personal sin that someone is choosing, a temptation in their life that they're choosing to commit. This is not a situation where, and I thought about it when you mentioned Delilah and that story. He was offered a way of escape. There's some situations,
Joshua.
Unfortunately. Man, I'm bad on the names.
It's all right, dude. You're good.
Jehoshaphat.
Sorry.
And King Ahab.
Yeah. Joshua.
But there's some situations where, unfortunately, and it absolutely sickens me, but there's not a way of escape in
Right.
those things. But that's also not a temptation for that person that they are choosing to sin.
No, that's called a crime.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so this is now there's a psychological thing that happens, and there's manipulation, and there's things that victim is now being told and believing that that's now their fault and that's something that they've committed, but it's absolutely not. And so to make a caveat, this is not something that God has put this particular person in that situation. If there was a way of escape, whatever it may be, this is talking about a temptation for a specific sin to a person that is choosing to commit that sin.
Yeah.
And we should run from those things. And so just wanted to make that quick caveat because I know people in my life that have dealt with that. I know, again, just the statistics of that are far higher than I would have ever thought. So I would hate for someone to hear that and think, well, God didn't give me a way of escape. So,
Yeah.
but that's a completely different situation. But anyways, all that to say, this has been great conversation. I love the promise that we have at the end for us to end with that Jesus is our deliverer. You said we will not be overtaken. We will not be abandoned. He will not set us up to fail, and we will always be given a way out. So just remembering that the faithfulness of our God, and coming back to that to remember that He's always faithful. He's always good. He's always there with us, and He's always going to provide that way out. We have to choose to take that path.
Yeah.
So
God is faithful. That's right.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you guys for listening.
See you
We'll
guys
see you
next
next
week.
week.
Pray for our teams.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, our
it's
UK
absolutely-
team
Please bring it
got
back.
a
on
UK
the
team.
floor.
Yep.
On the floor. Our UK team on the ground in Birmingham.
Birmingham.
UK. Is that Birmingham?
Yeah.
Birmingham.
Birmingham.
I've been told Birmingham.
Birmingham.
We actually had one of the church planners from Birmingham
Nice.
was in town last week. Me and John got lunch with him, and he had come to Nashville from Birmingham. So he was in Alabama.
Oh,
he was in
nice.
Birmingham,
Nice.
Alabama.
Nice.
But he's from Birmingham.
Yeah.
UK.
Nice.
So, yeah.
And then for our Costa Rica team, the BCM crew that's heading out
Yeah.
super early Sunday morning. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Thanks for mentioning
Prayers
those.
for
We'll
serving.
Yeah.
definitely be praying
Absolutely.
for 'em.
Awesome. Be praying.
See you guys next week.